Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. He's America's best-known short story writer. He was known to the world as O. Henry, and he once lived in Austin. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today we have an opportunity to turn our attention to the life and work of William Sidney Porter, better known by his pseudonym O. Henry. We do so because Porter had an active part in the local scene at the turn of the century, and the issue with which he struggled is very much part of our life today, namely suicide. Following his conviction for embezzlement in the federal court in Austin and suffering other devastating personal losses, Will, as he was known to his friends, seriously considered taking his own life. His will to live proved to be the spiritual triumph which made possible the literary legacy which the world has since come to love so. Now with us today are guests who will help us appreciate his crisis and his creativity. We welcome Valerie Bennett, director of the O. Henry Museum, and also Dr. Jenny Lynn Porter, author of a biography of O. Henry entitled Time to Write. We also have several young actors who will be helping us recreate something of William Sidney Porter's life in Austin and the story which highlighted his determination to choose life over death. But first, Valerie, we welcome you.
Thank you.
And Dr. Porter, we welcome you again. And we would like to have you share with us, Valerie, something about the work of the museum and some of its features.
Okay, well, the museum was founded in 1934 by a group of concerned citizens. They saw the real historical significance of the museum and decided that it should be moved in order to save it from demolition. So it was moved to one of the very first parks, Brush Square, and that is where it opened as a museum in 1934.
Mm-hmm. And the purpose is to maintain the memory and celebrate the work of O. Henry?
Well, yes, we maintain O. Henry's legacy, and we promote writing through our writing workshops and our various programs that we offer to the city.
I heard recently about a writing program for young people.
Yes, we started that in the spring, and that was a grant that we received from the Texas Commission on the Arts and additional money funding for a Youth at Risk project to sponsor workshops at the O. Henry Museum for children who are disadvantaged. And these were held after school, and they learned about O. Henry, and they learned about writing skills and creativity, and I think it was pretty successful.
Well, you know, one of the things that makes this, in fact, being his biographer, Jenny Lynn, maybe you could comment on this, appropriate that youth at risk would be the ones to benefit from the O. Henry legacy, because he was a person who knew what crisis was, and this issue of his, even as I think of teen suicide today, I mean, he was pondering that possibility, and what was it that turned William Sidney Porter into O. Henry from your standpoint?
Will Porter, when he went to prison, was not quite 35 years old. He had a long history there of training by his father, his mother, his grandmother, his aunt. He had been to church in his youth. He knew the Bible from cover to cover. You can tell that from his works. And this was a man of great integrity, really, of great faith. He said that he never took anything, any of the money from the bank. He had a belief in himself. And when he went to prison, of course, he was unknown. No one would have said, well, this person's going to become the great American master of the short story, and yet he did. He saved himself through imagination, Richard.
Just having that power to transcend his adverse circumstances.
He created nearly 300 short stories, which are loved all over the world by the Russians, the Japanese. They're translated in every language in the world. But he also created a new level, a new soul level for himself. The soul is the director, and he turned to that inner life because he had lost his wife through tuberculosis, through death. He lost that great father, the doctor, his grandfather was the editor of a newspaper in Greensboro. He came from a great family. He
in North Carolina?
The heir, he is a descendant of Sir Philip Sidney.
Oh, I see.
He had good blood. But he had lost all of his people, his wife, and he put his little girl Margaret out with his in-laws, so he was very much alone, and that's why we called our book Time to Write. This is the first time that he had been so very much alone.
I see. I think this this strength of soul is something that we'll have occasion to come back to, but you're mentioning the experience of people from all over the world reading his work, and at the O. Henry Museum, I understand you've got lots of folks that come from abroad there.
Yes, a lot of our visitors come from abroad, Japan particularly. Oita, Japan is a sister city to Austin, and every year approximately 100 high school students make this journey to Austin.
Is that right?
And their agenda includes the O. Henry Museum. And just last week we received a new acquisition, and it's the Hebrew translation of O. Henry short stories, and it's entitled Life Ain't What You Think. And it's written in Hebrew, and a gentleman visited the museum from Israel, and he said you must have an O. Henry Hebrew translation to go with your Russian translation. So we're proud of that.
Well, and I had occasion to learn that so many visitors may be coming from Russia because in the Soviet Union they have, is it a coin with O. Henry's...
a stamp.
As a stamp. Oh, okay.
Right.
And I guess a coin would be going a little far, but a stamp is doing well. Tell me about the O. Henry Museum just for a moment. I've read in the paper about it having some problems as far as its physical structure is concerned.
Yes.
And I know with the convention center going up immediately adjacent to that you're going to have even more visitors.
Oh, definitely.
And are you going to be able to accommodate them with what's there now, or what do you need to have done?
Well, definitely we need restoration, and that is something that will probably be long-term. There are some real problems with the structure, and the porch is a visible problem. I'm concerned about liability, that a visitor would become hurt. The foundation is sinking, and of course we have roof problems, and from what I understand, by a informal study by some University of Texas students just last spring, that this is the third roof that they believe since the house was built in 1886. So that tells you that we definitely are in need of a new roof. It's time to re-roof the house, but that's just not all. We have some rotting to the clapboards, and it's affecting the inside of the house. There's deterioration now coming inside the house.
Oh dear. Well, I guess it would only be fair, since we have some opportunity to share this need with the public, of, what can be done and how can it be remedied.
Well, we definitely need community support. And I think that we're in a position now where our city fathers, they're looking at us in a new light.
Fathers and mothers in this case. Right?
Yes, fathers and mothers. And the convention center's just to our south, and then historic 6th Street, they're being restored at the moment. They're just to the north. So the O. Henry Museum is a viable link between the convention center and 6th Street.
Okay. Jenny Lynn, I think that even though O. Henry was born in North Carolina and spent his last 9 or 10 years in New York City, that this period of time in Austin was obviously a formative one. And in reading your book, I've discerned that you're focusing upon at least his life in Texas as contributing to the shaping of his imagination.
Yes.
And I understand that he was the one who coined the phrase, the violet crown, as descriptive of Austin. Tell us a little bit about how that created his vision of life and his work.
Isn't it interesting that the city, which was the scene of such tragedy for him, was at the same time so beautiful to him and so loved. And you see, when he went away in 1898, he never came back.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 10 years that followed, all of the power of him, all the soul self, all the faith and all the strength came out. And the glory of that genius was revealed as if a curtain had gone up on the soul life of William Sidney Porter.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person who used to take Ethel when she was ill in the buggy and go sit beneath the windows of the Presbyterian Church.
And
I think listen to the choir.
I think too that I was just reconstructing, and you're a relative of O. Henry. Your name, Jenny Lynn Porter, indicates that.
Yes.
So you've had this come to you in more than a literary way, as you've been teaching, for instance, at Houston Tillotson these last years. And I would like to recall with our viewers that it was on April the 25th, 1898, that Porter arrived in Columbus, Ohio to begin a 3-year sentence in the federal penitentiary, having been convicted of embezzlement. And the courthouse is just on West 6 here in Austin. And that the fact that in her biography, Jenny Lynn has noted how he showed this the strain as he entered the prison, that he'd lost his daughter and his wife and a child earlier on, and as he entered, he had this sense of despair. You can almost today, as he wrote the letter back to his daughter and his mother-in-law and father-in-law, saying in this letter, I have the sense of despair, and that I've tried to reconcile myself
to staying here a while, but I'm absolutely at the end of my endurance. There is not one thing in life, at present or in prospect, that makes it of value. I know all the reasons that could be advanced as to why I should endure, but I've reached the limit of my endurance. It would be better for everyone else, and 1,000 times better for me, to end the trouble instead of dragging it out.
Well, I wondered about whether while you were in prison, that nevertheless gave you the occasion to be able to work through your problems just by your writing.
Well, writing has always been important to me, but it became much more so during my imprisonment than any time before. Had it not occurred that way, I could have easily used my position as prison pharmacist to end the ordeal.
And yet, you didn't. You had nevertheless found your way through that and to Austin in earlier years. What was the city like in those days?
Well, a friend of mine described Austin as a merry place in the 1880s. He wrote that it was filled with cowmen, flush with money, roaring to spend it on booze and gambling and women of the night. He also recalled how I and other friends were cronies with Bud and Toby Driscoll. We drank a lot, and we had good credit with Doc Muntic, who could look you in the eye and prescribe a pick-you-up that would put backbone in a rope.
Well, it sounded like a merry place indeed. And tell me about how long you were in the city here.
I was here for about 14 years, during which time I worked as a pharmacist, tried my hand at a cigar store, became a bookkeeper, and then a draftsman at the state land office before ending my career in this town as an ill-fated teller in the First National Bank.
And you had this variety of work, and you had this whirligig of social activities that you were talking about. Was there any time to write during that period?
Yes, I made submissions to newspapers. I even bought a satirical weekly, the Rolling Stone. And I wrote and illustrated for that light-hearted journal. But the Germans in this town, they didn't appreciate my lampoons, and it did not endure. For the most part, my early literary efforts proved ephemeral.
I see. But you, in addition to writing, I was amazed to learn that you had You had an artistic gift. You drew sketches for Will Barger's Indian Depredations of Texas.
Yes, and music. I loved the classics. And Gilbert and Sullivan, I would participate and enjoy them at the Millet Opera House and played piano and sang with my daughter Margaret.
I see. And I think you sang too in the what we call today Central Presbyterian Church, in the choir there with your future wife Athol and her mother Mrs. Roach. And
it was the pastor of that church, Richmond Kelly Smoot, that led Athol and me in our wedding vows. It was July 1st, 1887, that we obtained our wedding license, hired a city carriage, made our way out West 6th Street, and had the service in his home. His 12-year-old son, Lawrence, was our witness.
I see. Then I understand your home was then east of Congress, and that you'll be interested to know that that is being used by the public today for appreciation of who you were and what you did.
And any who enter that dwelling should notice the muslin curtains and the wicker chair that Athol bought with the money that I had saved for her to go to the Chicago World's Fair. Instead, she spent it on her home and on me. It was that sacrifice that later prompted me to write The Gift of the Magi.
You know, in reading that story and others that you wrote, I have the sense that the Bible was more to you than just a source for literary references and allusions.
Just how much so evidenced itself later when Athol contracted tuberculosis, and we were no longer able to sing in the choir. So on Sunday mornings, I would help her into the carriage, and we would travel up Brazos Street and stop by the west side of the church. And there, through the open window, we could hear the choir together.
You know, her death must have just grieved you deeply.
It was not just that I missed having her with me. Her faithfulness had always given me hope for the future. You know, after the charges for embezzlement were initially dropped, it was Athol who encouraged me to accept the position as columnist when it was offered by the Houston Post. And even though she believed in me as a writer with capabilities beyond newspapers, she knew I had to leave Austin. And she was not physically well enough to move. But nevertheless, she and 6-year-old Margaret joined me in Houston.
But when the charges were revived, you fled the country.
Shamefully, I must admit that. But when news of Athol's imminent death reached me in Honduras, I knew I had to return to be faithful to the one who had been faithful to me. So I came back to Austin to be with her and to accept arrest. She never withdrew her support from me, despite my weakness for drink, despite my business failures, despite my leaving her when she died. So I entered prison in despair.
Mm-hmm. And it's exactly at that point that the whole issue of the will to live comes forth so clearly, because how could you have gone through that self-condemnation apart from the legal condemnation that you underwent, the temptation for self-destruction that you referred to earlier? How could you leave prison and give the world the ultimate surprise ending with your own life, that in the last 9 or 10 years of your life in New York City, you were writing virtually one story a week? How could you have left us such a literary legacy under those circumstances?
Well, perhaps I should let one of my own stories provide the answer. I put myself in them, especially this one, which I called The Last Leaf, and in which I had the narrator say,
"It was to quaint old Greenwich Village that the art people came, hunting for north windows and low rents. At the top of a 3-story brick, Sue and Johnsy had their studio. One from Maine and the other from California. They had met at a restaurant on 8th Street, had found their tastes so congenial that they jointly rented a studio. Well, that was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger called pneumonia stalked the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers. Johnsy, whose blood had been thinned by California zephyrs, was smitten. She lay scarcely moving from her iron bedstead. She had strength only to gaze through the panes of the apartment's Dutch window across at the back side of the brick building on the other side of the street. A doctor was called in for treatment. After several visits, the physician one morning invited Sue into the hallway, saying,
"She has one chance in 10, and that chance is for her to want to live. Your little lady has made up her mind that she is not going to get better. Has she anything on her mind?"
She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples someday.
Paint? Bosh. Has she anything in her mind worth thinking about? A man, for instance.
A man? Is a man worth? But no, doctor, there's nothing of the kind.
Well, it's a weakness then. I will do all that science can accomplish. But when my patient starts counting the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from my curative remedies.
After the doctor had gone, Sue returned to Johnsie's room with a drawing board, thinking Johnsie asleep. As she was quietly sketching, she was startled as she turned to find her roommate with her eyes wide open, looking out the window and counting.
12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7.
Well, Sue looked out the window. What was there to count? Only a gnarled old ivy vine could be seen, climbing halfway up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves until its skeleton branches clung, almost bare, to the crumbling wall.
What is it, dear?
6. They're falling faster now. 3 days ago, there were almost 100. But now, there goes another. There are only 5 left.
5 what, dear?
Leaves on the ivy vine. When the last one falls, I must go too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you?
Oh, I've never heard of such nonsense. What have old ivy leaves to do with your getting well?
Look, there goes another one. That leaves just 4. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too.
Johnsie, dear, promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I am done working.
Yes, but you tell me when you're finished, because I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too. I'm tired of waiting. I want to turn loose and go sailing down, down, like one of those poor tired leaves.
Try to sleep. I must call Berman up to be my model for the old hermit's picture.
Old Berman was a painter who lived on the ground floor beneath them. He was 60 and had always been about to paint a masterpiece, but he had never begun it, instead smelling strongly of juniper berry. He earned a little by serving as model to those young artists in the village who could not pay the price of a professional. Sue told him of Johnsie's fancy, how she would, light and fragile as a leaf herself, float away when her slight hold in the world grew weaker. They went upstairs while Johnsie was still sleeping. They peered fearfully out of the window at the vine. A persistent cold rain mixed with snow was falling. Sue then pulled the shade down to the windowsill as old Berman made his way back below. When Sue awoke the next morning, she found Johnsie with dull, wide-open eyes, staring straight at the drawn green shade.
Pull it up. I want to see.
Wearily, Sue obeyed. And lo, after the beating rain and fierce gusts of wind, there yet stood out against the brick wall one ivy leaf, the last on the vine. Still dark green near its stem, but with edges tinged with yellow, it hung bravely from a branch 20 feet above the ground.
I've been a bad girl, Sue. Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how willful I was. It's wrong to want to die. Bring me a little broth now. I need to get my strength back so I can begin that painting of the Bay of Naples.
The doctor came that afternoon, and afterwards he said to Sue,
With good nursing, she will live. But it is not to be for the old man downstairs. Berman, I believe his name is. Some kind of artist. The janitor found him this morning, icy cold, his clothing and shoes wet through. No one could imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. But a lantern was found, and a ladder, and a palette mixed with green and yellow colors.
Yes, Berman had painted his masterpiece on the wall by the vine on the night that the last leaf fell.
Piece indeed, as this story of O. Henry is, and indeed as the life of O. Henry is as a whole. For it not only brings together literary excellence, but shows forth the will to live, how it's sustained by sacrificial love. This truth in fiction found its counterpart in the life of William Sidney Porter, as we have had occasion to see today, and as we have looked back through the eyes of Jenny Lynn Porter in her biography, and where she quotes Emily Dickinson so apropos of William Sidney Porter, "A death blow is a life blow to some, and who until they died did not alive become." And it's with a sense of gratitude that we want to thank all who have helped bring Sidney Porter's life to our attention this day. Bill Avra, the one who has recreated the person of O. Henry himself. And those young people, Judsonia Green playing the part of Sue, Rachel Duncan as Johnsy, Michael Day Jr., the part of the doctor, and Bierman as well. And from behind the scenes, the narrator, Joe Haggard. And we thank each of these persons with us on the set. We have Jenny Lynn Porter, the author of the book of O. Henry's life, and Valerie Bennett, who is from the O. Henry Museum. On behalf of the Austin Metropolitan Ministries, I'm Richard Thompson, thanking you for joining us, inviting you to be back with us next week. And peace be with you. Call Austin Metropolitan Ministries